Let's Nerd Out. I'm Dan.
And I'm Sam.
Tell you a little bit about what's going on in the industry this week. So, what's happening in the wine world?
Yeah, so we're just digging into this week's Wine Spectator Insider Weekly. Every week, if you're in the industry, you get an insight to what big reviews are coming out, specifically from Wine Spectator. Big thing with Wine Spectator, overall still respected as one of the top wine reviewers. They are a little bit more strict than some others, especially in the fine wine world, and they don't have the mantra of being paid for reviews too often. But this week is actually a big category for wine collectors. We talk a lot about Brunello, and this time of year, new vintages of Brunello come out, but specifically because of 2019, last year's release being such a massive deal, it's no surprise that the big Riserva level Brunellos are getting massive scores across the board.
So Brunello, every time that gets released this time of year for us, it becomes a thing in the stores, for private buyers, for everyday buyers. It's just, like Sam said, it's reviewing the vintages, talking about the weather reports and how, because again, we're talking a 5-year lagging indicator minimum, 6 years for Riservas. Mm-hmm. So the 2019 vintage, which was the vintage of kind of what we call the lifetime last year for just the regular Brunellos, now they're releasing the Riservas from there, which is even going to be next level. So are there any that stand out to you we're seeing?
The big thing for me is a lot of producers will make a Riserva every year. And to be fair, those producers are either one of two things. They either make a Riserva every year to say that they made a Riserva every year, or they're making a Riserva even in off vintages because maybe their property had a better year than the overall experience of what Brunello was for that vintage. But as we know, 2019 is going to go down as one of the best vintages in the last 25 years. So anyone that makes a Riserva is going to make a Riserva in 2019. So we talk about the biggest collectible wines out there, the Altesinos of the world, Il Chiuso di Sotto, Beyond di Santi are all being released right now in the 2019 vintage, and we're seeing a lot of big scores.
And so not only was 2019, right now the Reservas being released from 2019 or in Beyond di Santi situation 2018, we have the report coming out on 2020 and that landing and hitting the news here. So a tougher vintage.
Tougher vintage, but still pretty solid. We're still seeing some pretty good reviews here. We're seeing some solid kind of upper 90s from the iconic producers. We're seeing some struggling people as well, but it's not a bad vintage. That's the important thing here. There's no horrible wine coming out of Montalcino right now because 2020 was still a decent year.
I think that there's two words that we need to hammer here. Tough does not equal bad.
No.
So it was a tough vintage to produce wine, and that's because of the weather patterns and the grape and vine conditions, which make it more challenging. But that's where, so this is where in the wine industry, the quality of certain factors really matter in the output of a product. So if you have an entry-level product, this is where the output of that may not stand up to how tough the vintage was. But winemaker, location of the winery, this meaning the soil types, which direction the vineyards are facing, what are they exposed to, these things actually do matter. So you can make a good wine out of a tough vintage, but it's tough to make a bad or a good wine if you don't have the right team in place and the right vineyards.
Yeah, I think we talk about good vintages, bad vintages. What does that mean? Usually it means a slightly colder, wet spring to a really dry summer to like a little bit of rain later to plump up the grapes. All those things make a perfect vintage. Doesn't happen that often. It doesn't happen every year you get a perfect vintage, and that's why wines are so different and they get rated in different ways. 2019 was a nearly perfect vintage. Almost every single reviewer give the vintage 98 to 100 points. Some people going over top and saying it's the best vintage in 20 years. But we're seeing the reviews of wines coming out of 2019 from last year's sales that we've done, and we got a lot of people the 2019s that we're looking for. But this year, it's all about Reservas. It's the higher end versions of what we tasted last year. The Reservas, they normally pull their best barrels. It's aged a little bit longer in the barrels and then released, like you said, a year later. And sometimes if people think they even need more time when they're tasting their barrels, we'll see them even more years down the line. That's why you're seeing some 2015s and 2016s in this report.
And I think for tougher vintages where sometimes maybe even like we'll go really nerdy on some stuff is like where the tannin level can vary. You might have to wait a little bit longer for those to actually drink well because the tannin levels, the alcohol levels are going to be a little goofy based on how the grape actually ripened.
Or drink it earlier.
Exactly.
Like a really good example is 2017. 2017 necessarily wasn't an amazing vintage in Brunello. It was a decent vintage. But I'm reading everyone saying like, open your 17s now. They're singing.
Yeah.
But like 16s aren't ready.
Interesting.
And you know, and that's just because 16 iconic vintage, really powerful wines. They might need another 4 or 5 years to hit that primary drinking period. But the collectors that want to save their 2016s, they don't want to open them up yet. They're drinking their 17s right now because that's what's singing in the glass.
And so as we kind of look down at this list, you know, something that I know most wine drinkers do is kind of get a nostalgia factor to when you're looking at these. So I look at Uccelliera, where when we got into this industry about a decade ago, you really didn't even know about Uccelliera. And then just because we happened to be working with the producer or the importer and the distributor for a while, my wife and I actually got to go there. And the funny thing for us in Uccelliera, it always has a fun place in our hearts, is because we showed up. We're in a rented Fiat in the classic American honeymooners, and we show up, and I roll down into the driveway, and I'm just like, there's no way this is Uccelliera. Like, there's just no way. Like, it was, you only saw the front of the estate, and it's not really an estate. It's a house with a winemaking facility and then some vineyards. It's a family.
Yeah.
So I end up backing out. And then we send a few emails, and then they're like, no, that's it. And we come back in, and we end up having the most spectacular day there. So much so that it was the winery for me. This is honest truth. It was the winery for me that changed my perspective on the way that wine is presented commercially here in the United States versus how it's actually made. And
especially one of the most historic
because
in the world.
You want to know why? Because even a small producer of quality product like that, their marketing, like physical marketing, is so good that you think it's a big company doing it.
For sure.
And then you show up and it's a non-English speaking nonna sitting at the table. They're cooking for you, and you're like, what?
Well, you know, the truth is, it probably comes a lot from the importer.
Exactly.
Maybe they're not the ones with the sense of doing it because
100%.
they're such like a historic small producer and family owned in this small thing. But the importer knows the quality of the grapes, so I would bet the importer, or however they're getting the wines here, is probably the backbone of the strategy there.
No, 100%.
And that's what kind of what you're getting.
See if I can.
Nona ain't on Instagram.
Exactly, 100%. No. And then so the
99.1.
sister brand that they have is, I think, called Voliero of Uccelliera, and we've worked with it before. And I believe, I'm going to kind of butcher this up, but Uccelliera, I want to say it's the cousin of the head winemaker, has its own project, and so they have a project that comes together. I think it's called Voliera, where the estates kind of, I don't want to say share grapes, but it's a share essentially, and they make a product from it. But it was the first estate, and it took years. I was in the industry for years before really experiencing that and realizing that that was a salt of the earth experience. And
especially because you get trapped in American wine making, like going to visit American wine regions. You get trapped in the world of where it's rarely like that. Because if you go to California, you go to Napa Valley, you're not in Santa Rita Hills where it's like that.
This was there. This was at their table.
That's
there,
awesome.
They opened up a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, we're drinking Uccelliera, you know.
It's very
back
cool.
to 2012's Riserva 06.
Amazing.
You know, like we're drinking stuff from their, at their
The
house.
cellar.
Yeah, from the
Stuff
cellar,
you can't
100%.
get. You literally can't get.
And you know what? He just touched on something that's really important. And if anyone is watching this that is here from the U.S. winemaking game, I think a piece of advice is instill more hospitality. The wine culture here in this country has become stiff and commoditized.
That's why we call Napa the Disney World of wine.
And it could use a little bit more. I joke around and I say I've been to Napa now more than I can count, and I don't know that I've ever really had a glass of wine. You taste a lot of wine, but you don't just get poured a glass of wine by somebody and going, hey, let me come in and meet our family.
Lucky for me, going through the quartermaster sommeliers, there's a lot of internship programs where you're going to a winery and you're not tasting wine in the wine tasting room. I was lucky to go to Viator Wines and sat in his living room and ate hot dogs and tasted $400 bottles of single vineyard cab, and I feel like the same kind of love that I got when I went to Burgundy and when I went to Champagne and I went to these other places. And it's so rare because in their tasting room, it's not like that.
Exactly.
Right? And I feel like the industry people, we get a little lucky in that sense.
Yeah.
But to the outward world, it's like for these people to keep up with it, you have to do this.
But even then, even through the industry, you have to have the industry in, and then you have to backdoor it in the industry that it's not just an industry tasting. Napa, California, anywhere, East Coast, wherever winemaking, is happening, like open the sense of hospitality and experience a little bit, and I think it goes a long, long way.
Finger Lakes for that reason.
Yeah.
There's no one in the Finger Lakes that has like an overwhelming tasting experience. All small. It's
Yeah.
all tiny. It's all just very intimate. And yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think there is a place for it in Napa Valley. Just sometimes I feel like in a lot of things we do, we're working very fast. So you're not able to give that intimate sense or that intimate feeling. But I think there are some places in California you can. Like I said, Santa Rita Hills. You go up to Mendocino. Just like, hey, if you're gonna go to Napa Valley in the summertime, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a madhouse. You know, there's nothing you can really do about it.
All right, let's do first impressions here.
Cool. So
What's in the
first
bottle?
impression. Really cool producer I've worked with for a really long time is Domaine Boisson, which is a Southern Rhône producer. They don't make shots at the pop, but they pretty much hit many other areas within the Southern Rhône. So Ventoux, Carène, a bunch of other small appellations in Southern Rhône. But an opportunity to come up to get the 2016 in Côte d'Rône. And we talked about great vintages. 2016 Southern Rhône is, I mean, since I've been working with wine, one of the greatest vintages to ever hit the shelf. Since I've been working in retail wine, it might possibly be the best vintage in Southern Rhône here. It's not shots near the pop where I feel like a lot of those ratings come from, but we know the weather was amazing. I know I have a great producer, and in turn, getting a wine like this at an incredible value for what we sell this for, which is $15 a bottle, it drinks incredibly well.
And what is in the bottle for the view?
This is going to be Garage Syrah Mourvedre. It's a red blend.
Yep. So GSM, you'll hear people say a GSM blend, and that is, you know, when referencing a Rhône blend, that's what
Yes.
they're some variation of that combo there. I have not had this, so this is literally my first impression of this wine. I mean, again, we'll nerd out here and go down. I immediately kind of look, and it already has what again, and I'm not a formally trained som, so this is all things I pick up, and so, for all you formally trained people, you're probably, did we learn that, regularly? But it's already, so you can see sediment, number one.
Yep,
number
a
two,
little
it
bit.
almost has a browner hue to it.
Yeah, I would say it still has a lot of redness,
Yeah.
but there's what they call brick
Yep.
or bricking on the outside of the top layer.
Yep.
In the middle, it's still pretty red.
It is.
But you see, once it thins out a little bit, you get this almost like brick orange,
Yep.
slightly brown thing going on. That comes from age, but on the nose, there's so much fruit here still, and that's what really amazed me. But the secondary notes of leather and earth, like this is as classic as Southern Rhône gets when it comes to how Rhône wine should taste. Not overly extracted, not massively full-bodied. This is super classic Côte d'Rône from an incredible vintage.
So 2016, we'll call it on the value side.
For sure.
Are people opening this and letting it decant at all, or are they opening it, going right in? Like, how do you prefer this?
To me, my preference, I decant everything. So I would throw this in the decanter for 5-10 minutes, but it's a pop and pour wine. It's still in screw cap. It's meant to be pop and poured, ready to go. But for me, this isn't a wine that you want to, open and enjoy over a week. Probably over a couple days would be quite fine. But this is like classic, medium-bodied, old world, acid forward, earth driven, but lots of bright fruit notes still on the back end.
And for not having anything in the system, meaning I'm not eating this, I'm not drinking this with
Eating
food.
anything in
No,
the
it's actually really balanced. It's
for
really well balanced. For if you go old world, if this were an Italian wine, we'd be in trouble. But the age actually helps.
Yep.
It softens it up.
Yeah.
Very well balanced, to be
Yeah.
honest with you.
There's no big burn.
No,
The tannins are
exactly.
still there, but soft and medium.
And what should people be expecting when opening a Rhône blend? Like, what is the Rhône experience?
So the Rhône experience for me right off the bat is, well, it depends on where you are, but most Southern Rhône we're talking about here, Northern Rhône's a different animal. Syrah is king. It's my favorite red wine in the world. But in Southern Rhône, you get a little bit more Grenache heavy wines. And if you're tasting pure Grenache, one of the blind testing things we always talk about, it's like a kick of tannins with a sun-kissed Pinot Noir. But in the Southern Rhône, a lot more of the earthiness comes out, a lot more of the clay soils, the sand soils, those things that come out in the Northern Rhône really affect the wine, and a little bit more of the earth-driven flavors come out, while the fruit flavors are still there, especially in something like Côte d'Rône. I feel like a really classic Southern Rhône style wine is still on the backbones of an old world, earthy, driven wine.
Yeah, no, it's solid for sure. For sure. Again, value wines across all price points, which kind of leads us into a hot take and goes, hey, what happens to this if tariffs pop off?
Oh,
So
going down.
he doesn't want to go down the road, but I'm going to go down the road because that's how we have to do it. But we're looking at $16.99 here, which means if this wine comes to us, it's probably and it truly is a 200% increase on the tariff. It's a $30 wine minimum, right?
Yeah.
Like depending on how this works. So obviously, no one necessarily wants that to happen. There's probably different macroeconomic implications and there are
sure.
micro. So these wines should that happen, will be harder and harder to find at an affordable price point. That's really the end result. That's it.
There's really nothing you can do about it other than kind of just, I think we've talked about it a bunch in when we go back and forth about it, but it's a very, when it happens, and you have to make decisions and you have to pivot in those senses. Like, now, I'm a very old world wine drinker. It would really affect someone like me who loves Bordeaux and loves Rhône and loves Champagne and loves all those things. It wouldn't affect the people that love California wines, but then the demand for American wines go up. Does that mean the supply is then limited? And then those prices go up too. It's a very up in the air thing. I'm still a firm believer. I don't think that they can afford not to export wine. I don't see it happening. So
I don't disagree. I think, like I said, I think the best way the best take we can have on it is that there's a micro and macro outlook.
Yep.
Some win in the macro, some lose in the micro. It's just kind of the way it is. As wine lovers and drinkers, it's never a good thing should it happen, for everything to triple in price. So hopefully it doesn't happen. We'll see what happens if it does. There's always value to be found, but we drink for now.
Does it make your jobs, both individually, more difficult?
I think we talk about authenticity a lot, and I think that it's not that I hate California wines. They're just like not my style. So if I'm going to get behind something and you really want to see my passion come out, it tends to be in more old world style wines. That might mean that I get exposed to a lot more great American wines or other places where we're not getting affected in that sense, and maybe I can get behind those things as well. But for me, it's a little bit more in the details, and I am really passionate about Champagne. And if Champagne's affected, I still want to be passionate about Champagne, but it's going to be a lot harder for me to get that wine in people's hands when normally it would be $40 for a good grower Grand Cru Champagne from Mouzy. Now that wine is instantly $120.
So I have a little bit different of a take, and this is more just from the pure business perspective. I think that the consumer traditionally, especially in a retail sense, we split it apart into a couple of different categories. We have industry people that, regardless of if they work in the industry or not, they're wine people, right?
Yes.
It will affect them one way or another, everything
sure.
you just explained,
Yeah.
right? But then there's the people that just have honestly driven the American, wine and spirits economy, regardless of where it gets imported from or distributed from. So for those people that are just looking for quality and value, I think there's an opportunity for them. Sure. I think there's an opportunity for them to, so that's, again, I know it affects some people, but as a business, we have to pivot, and some things are just out of our control. What we like is not always, doesn't always matter. Yeah, it doesn't always matter.
Sure.
So
well, that's also, I understand why.
Exactly.
If I taste a Napa Valley Cab just because I decide to drink a Côte de Rhône at $100 over Napa Valley Cab, doesn't mean I don't understand what great Napa Cab is supposed to be.
Well, that's like at our holiday party earlier in the year. What was the wine that was so kick-ass? That was an aged wine.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Long Meadow Ranch.
Yeah, the Long Meadow Ranch. What year was it? 06?
05.
05?
05.
05 Long Meadow Ranch half bottle that held up incredibly and was drinking. So I think it just gives an opportunity to the shifting dynamics in the wine market. Again, no one wants it overall, right? People hurting in the industry is not what you look for happening, but we kind of have to ebb and flow and move with the roll with the punches.
Yeah, I think we do that in so many things.
Exactly.
And so many things in business, kids. I mean, I don't have kids, but I know you just kind of roll with it and you kind of pivot and you figure it out as it comes at you. And those are kind of the kind of things that are going to happen. I expect that we'll see a really good flow of other countries kind of coming in those value price points. What could happen is people might be more explorative, and if the tariffs go away, maybe we get more people to drink the stuff when it comes back.
Yeah, no, agree. Absolutely. So 2019 Brunello Riserva, the review of the 2020 vintage, a first take on a incredibly well-aged value Côte de Rhône, and some hot takes on tariffs. That is Nerding Out this week.